Maniacs, welcome back to the channel. Your local bedhead here. This is a video dedicated by, or recommended to me by, Reed. I think this is Reed Coles, and recommended this video. This is called The Ghost Town of Bonnie Clare, Nevada, Gunfights, Train Wrecks, and Gold by the Part-Time Explorer. I don't know this channel too well. I'm not familiar with it, and to my knowledge, I have not heard of this place. To my knowledge. I could be wrong about that. This could be a place Ghost Adventures has investigated before, or maybe another ghost hunting group, and maybe I just will, my memory will be refreshing once I take a look at it. But anyways, guys, if you like this type of content and want some more content like this continue, get this video up to over 100 likes. And if you yourself want to recommend a video to me or get me to do something, I definitely recommend going over to the GoFundMe link, which will be in the description down below. Go over to the GoFundMe, help me get my childhood home, which it is about my childhood home. I'm buying it for my grandma. Yes, I do work a job, by the way. I am making money, but this is kind of one of those things to where I'm not making enough money to buy a house. And the house itself is worth about $60,000. So we've already raised about $2,000. The more people who run over there start donating, and I think there's an option where you can actually leave a recommendation, like a comment on the GoFundMe. If you decide you want to do it, you can leave a recommendation to a video you want me to check out, and I will get to it. So this video is dedicated to you, Reed. Thank you so much again. You're a badass. Let's go ahead and dive into the video, guys, and I'll give you guys my thoughts during and, of course, after the video.
Gunfights, train wrecks, and gold. That's what you'd find at this small, abandoned mining town of Bonnie Clare, Nevada. A junction along the...
Wow, it really is a ghost town. There is like barely anything in sight. I'm sure a lot of the buildings that might have been around might have been torn down too, for all I know. But yeah, that's a ghost town.
Las Vegas and Tonopah Railroad. The history of Bonnie Clare, put simply, is a complete mess. There's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that the history books just simply gloss over, and even the meticulous publications of Nevada history can't give more than a couple paragraphs about this place. I was drawn to it because of how photogenic the ruins are. There are some stunning shots that I've seen photographers take of this ghost town, but the mystery of this town, the lack of documentation, and the vagueness of its history has been drawing me in. There are scattered ruins here, wooden buildings that are falling apart, stone buildings dating back farther, and a rusty, creaky old mill on the hillside. A wooden trailer left behind by one of the last residents, and two lonely graves of young women, their information already partially obscured. The abandoned track beds coming through this railroad stop remind us of the town's dependency on...
Wow, that's kind of sad that there are like some tombstones out there that are just completely destroyed by time, and we just don't even know the full information about like when she died. I think the name was Claire. I don't recognize this place. I don't know if Ghost Adventures or any other ghost paranormal group, to my knowledge, has ever been here before. To my knowledge, I could be wrong about that. You have to leave a comment in the comment section
on its two railroad companies, and give us a clue as to where a train wreck once occurred. But beyond the immediate ruins, there's even more waiting to be discovered. Looking back on the excitement and tragedy, the ups and downs, and the humble beginnings and lonely end, can we assemble this town's story like
1911
never
on
before?
that one.
And can we find the earliest remains of the town site, currently lost to the history books?
This is crazy.
I've been to Bonnie Clare on 4 different occasions to study the site. The first 3 times with...
Gosh, some of these buildings look like they're about to freaking just tumble over. Like, I'd be next bit like a few big gusts of wind. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those buildings just go.
My wife Emma, but the 3rd time, Emma stayed home with our son, and my friend Amos came out with me. This isn't really important, but know that this video is a mashup of multiple visits with multiple assistants, and on each visit we found something new. We're in Nye County, Nevada, where the main part of the Bonnie Clare ghost town sits along Highway 267, the highway cutting right down the middle. The town site started off as simply a mill. Gold Mountain to the north was bustling with activity since the late 1860s, when gold was found, and the overinflated State Line Gold Mining Company brought hundreds of workers to the mountain, setting up several small towns and transient camps across the range. Most of the activity was concentrated to the north side of the mountain range, with ore being milled and removed from there. Up until the 1880s, the lands to the south of the mountain range remained mostly unworked and uninhabited. That all changed with the slow grind of Guy Thorpe, prospector and miner who was working the recently abandoned Rattlesnake Mine on a remote southern part of the range. This man would mine his ore and haul it out in sacks carried by a donkey several miles through the desert to be milled at.
Rattlesnake Mine does sound familiar. Like, I've heard of that name before. Rattlesnake Mine. It's gonna bother me. It's gonna really bother me now.
The old camp town site towards the north.
We'll keep watching.
It was long and weary to hike this so often, so he sought to establish a mill of his own, closer to his mine and somewhere with a more downhill walk. To establish a mill, you need a source of water, and most springs in the area had already been tapped for either mill or drinking use. But suspiciously, one spring had been entirely neglected, the aptly named Stinking Springs, a few miles south of the range.
That's an interesting name.
Well, Thorpe quickly realized why it was called Stinking Springs, but this didn't deter him. Water is water. It served its purpose, and a mill was established there. He named it Thorpe's Well. Now here's where things get odd. People don't seem to know where this was anymore. People don't even know.
I'm sorry, no offense to the man. I do not drink water that stinks. No, thank you. You do not know what's running through those waters. Water is water, but good water and bad water are still two different things.
Where Stinking Springs was. When I talk to local historians, I get a vague answer that it was a few miles south of the current Bonnie Clare site. But it's not charted, and it's not recorded. This always bugged me. If there was a mill out there, there'd certainly be something left of it. On my third visit to the town in 4 years, my friend Amos and I set out heading south from the town site, looking for the remains of the original Thorpe's Well and Mill. We were armed with the photograph of the original mill, hoping to gain clues from the peaks in the background.
Also armed with a gun.
The mill was built backed up against a hillside, but we didn't need a photograph to tell us that. More often than not, these stamp mills are usually backed up against a hill. I'm using this mill of a town in Montana that I've explored as an example. The ore is brought up the hill to the top of the mill, and crushed and pounded, moving with gravity down the hill, with each level of the mill allowing the ore to be worked even further. I'm betting that we'll find not only the foundation to Thorpe's Mill, but a distinct trail heading up the hillside to the top level of the mill. We followed the old railroad beds to the southeast, heading out into the Sarcobatus Flats in the general direction of the ghost towns of Rhyolite and Bullfrog, as well as Beatty, the nearest civilization, but that's 30 miles south of here. Between here and there, it's vast, empty, nothing.
Yeah, no kidding. A lot of nothing.
We were driving along to get a shot of the railroad bed heading towards Rhyolite, and Amos goes and spots ruins on the right. Now, I'm sure they've been visited long before. People come through here all the time on ATVs or whatever, but these ruins must be Thorpe's Well.
The site of Thorpe's Well and his old mill was a lot closer to Bonnie Clare than I'd anticipated, and it wasn't too hard to find after all. Situated at the foot of Bonnie Peak, Thorpe's Well can be plainly seen from the air. In the immediate area around the mill site, we find the ruins of old stone houses. Buildings out here were made mostly of stone before around 1900, so this helps to confirm that we're looking at older, pre-1900 settlements. And the only ones that were known to have been built in the area belonged.
Isn't it crazy to think? Like, I always find fascination with this. It's always cool to think those rocks were grabbed and picked up by people from the early 1900s and placed like that, or the 1800s, right? The late 1800s, early 1900s, and placed like that, and they're still standing. I always find just a huge fascination, so cool. I know it might not be cool to a lot of people, but for me, it's like, it's kind of awesome. It's just really cool.
To Thorpe's Well. We can say with certainty now that we had positively identified the lost location of Thorpe's Well, the first serious town site in the Bonnie Clare district.
So I've got this archival photograph here. This is an unidentified mill here at Bonnie Clare. There's no real indication of when this photograph was taken or where in Bonnie Clare it is. We were driving along here, and Amos pointed out ruins on the right, and it looks like that's this mill, and we're way off south from Bonnie Clare, which means chances are this is Thorpe's Well, the mill at Thorpe's Well, the mill at Thorpe. This road is what we're standing on right here, and you can still see some of the foundations. You can even see where there's a trail heading up alongside, and the remnants of that trail are right here. There's litter around here, there was a campfire, there's tire tracks. We're not the first people here, but I do think we're the first people to come here and know what we're looking at and identify this site, know the name of it as Thorpe. And, you know, it's not, you can't really call it a discovery, but it's a significant identity that was discovered.
But we did create a solid link between the lost piece of the Bonnie Clare puzzle and what was probably a mysterious, unidentified ruin for local explorers. By far, though, the most prominent building at Thorpe's Well was his mill.
Yeah, look at that.
Foundations still remain, showing us exactly where the mill stood.
You can even see like the structure of the land is still the same as it was back then. I fucking love that, man.
It was a 5-stamp mill. Now, a stamp is a machine that pounds and crushes the rock ore into smaller pieces to be processed further, and a mill with 5 stamps is a fairly good-sized mill. This mill was so successful, in fact, that Thorpe wasn't only processing his own ore here, but the ore from 2 other nearby mining operations.
That's so cool.
What was that then?
Stinky Spring. They would have channeled the water right by the mill. Yeah, it's a great thing that this is here because we never would have found the spring. There's hardly any remnant of it, but they built this to channel it right next to the mill.
This is crazy. We found the mill, we found the springs, we found where some of the houses would have been.
Hey, check it out.
Made it very convenient for everybody to go back to work and stuff. You know, there's a few small houses, you know, the creek or what, you know, the river, the fountain, whatever, the fucking. Yeah, it was all next to each other, so everything was just convenient.
They've got Prince Albert in a can. Yeah.
That's crazy.
This wall going along here for quite some ways.
A flask for the water.
It starts about here and continues way around that bend.
The old roadway up to the top of the mill was still here as I expected. The grading is still obvious, relatively undisturbed, but small bridges have been removed and we can see gaps here. No doubt these bridges were made of wood, and wood as a resource was precious and useful elsewhere after the mill had been abandoned.
It could be for bringing ore up to the spring. If it goes to the top of the mill, the ore would be crushed and pounded going down, and then brought out down to the road below.
The roadway would have stretched from here all the way up to the Rattlesnake Mine nearly 10 miles northwest. Guy Thorpe died in 1893, before Bonnie Clare itself had really evolved.
Okay, so
to the
this
north
was
of here.
even before then. This was like fucking 1893. So yeah, late 1800s. Sorry, I might not have been paying attention too much to that. I guess it might have slipped my mind. So I apologize to anybody. I probably just annoyed right there. But okay, no, that makes more sense. I apologize. I really do.
Where he's buried, who knows? Somewhere about these hills and flats, I'm sure. He left a third of his mine and mill to a man named Louis Shadovich, who bought out the other 2/3. Louis made an absolute killing on Thorpe's old claims, pulling in $142,000 over 8 years. Then sold his share.
That's $4 million today, almost $5 million today.
to 2 miners turned businessmen, Willis Emerson and Fred Foddenkamp. They incorporated the Bonnie Clare Bullfrog Mining and Milling Company. The name Bullfrog was drawing on the success of the bullfrog claims to the south, and Bonnie Clare was Emerson's wife. They applied for a post office at Thorpe's Well, changing the name simply to Thorpe, but misspelling Thorpe and losing the E at the end. At the time, Thorpe had a population of around 75. So this specific early site of Thorpe that we're looking at right now, at its peak, had a population of 75 people just on this little hillside.
Very small community.
The early 1900s saw several gold and silver booms nearby, spawning the large towns of Tonopah and Goldfield, and investors flocked to these towns looking for nearby mining ventures to back. The Bonnie Clare Company sold them a ton of stock and decided to purchase an upgraded mill. Well, since they were building a new mill, they might as well build it closer to their mine site, rather than the one at Thorpe's Well, which is nearly 10 miles to the south. Especially since they now had the capital to pipe in water wherever they needed, and they no longer needed that stinky spring. With the boom to the south in Rhyolite and Bullfrog, 2 new railroads were being planned that would pass right by this site. And with this in mind, the Bonnie Clare Company picked a spot along the tracks that was closest to their mines. This hillside about 1.5 miles northwest of Thorpe. Within the first week of train service in 1906, the new mill for the Bonnie Clare Company was shipped in via rail and assembled on the hill. A town started popping up around it immediately. The mill was built here, but the mill we're looking at right now is not the same mill. It was in fact an earlier mill, smaller and simpler than the one that we see now, but still larger than the initial one at Thorpe's Well. This one was a 10-stamp mill.
So
Some of
cool,
the money
man.
behind
Look,
the Bonnie Clare.
I was never a professional when it came to history in school. I was never, top grade A's in my class kid, but there was always a part of me that just enjoyed the fascinating aspects of just what came before us. I just, it really fascinates me. It really interests me. And this puts me in the mood to go back to history class for some reason.
Their company must have come from investors in Montana, because when the train station was built at the site, it was called Montana Station. And to match that, the town's primary social and drinking joint was called the Montana Club. The first railroad to come through was the Bullfrog Goldfield Railroad in 1906, followed immediately by the Las Vegas and Tonopah Railroad. A third railroad company, the Tonopah and Tidewater, leased the right-of-way from the Bullfrog and Goldfield, and now 3 train lines pass through the town regularly. From the air, we can see where the 2 railroads came through. The railroad beds are still noticeable.
No
The
kidding.
various railroads coming through redefined the identity of the town from a small settlement supporting the mine to being one of the main connection points for the railroad and Gold Mountain.
This concrete pad was likely the foundation of Montana Station, or at least a later incarnation of it. This road here was probably a railroad bed, and chances are it continued on down to here, to some sort of a depot area.
The cities of Tonopah and Goldfield were now connected to the booming towns of Rhyolite and Beatty to the south, and Bonnie Clare was a major stopping point for these trains, especially with the large water tower.
I love that they put the pictures right in front of the freaking landscape. I think dude, that's one of the reasons why I loved Adam the Woo, because he would do the same things with filming locations. He would put pictures or videos of the same, screenshots or moments from the movie with the real location, and you could match it up. I love that they do that, man. That's crazy. I can picture it in my head now of what it would have looked like.
Tower constructed at the Montana Station. 2 additional rail lines were considered, one to the copper mines of Ubehebe 50 miles to the west, and a 7-mile railroad into the towns on Gold Mountain to the north, both of which would link up with the main lines at Montana Station. However, neither of these would come to fruition, but at least for now, this area was to be referred to as an official railroad junction. At the earliest point in its history, the site was called Thorpe's Well, and then renamed simply Thorpe by the Bonnie Clare Mining Company. When the trains came through, the railroads named the site the Montana Station. but the newspapers of the nearby town simply referred to the site as Bonnie Clare, as the mining company was the primary activity there, and that's the name that stuck. In 1909, the post office was moved from the old site at Thorpe to near the railroad station of downtown Bonnie Clare. Not only did the town have several different names, but Bonnie Clare had several official spellings. The first Bonnie Clare postmaster, Mammy Mitchell, tried 4 different times to file the name of the town correctly, but spelling errors prevented it from going through each and every
People keep messing up names around there.
time, and with each attempt came a new, fully certified, different spelling of the town.
Bonnie Clare.
I should note, of course, that the word town is used loosely. What would pass for a town out here, on the fringes of American civilization,
would hardly be more than a pop-up tent city out east.
only a few wooden buildings were going up. Most, however, were simple, temporary canvas structures, which is why so little remains today. For a Wild West town, there were some good memories here. Christmas 1909 was one of the most festive occasions in Bonnie Clare that we know of.
Love
The
that
mining
shot.
company and a railroad agent came together to fund a full Christmas party for the whole town, celebrated at the Bonnie Clare Mill. Entertainment was provided by a string band straight out of Mexico.
This door frame has fallen in. Check it out. This was the old door frame.
Wait, seriously?
Here's what happened. I'll tell you what happened. You can see the top of that door frame is still there. So that's held in place. Here's the top of this door frame. It actually looks like it's split. So that was right there. And because it's between the two side panels, it was keeping the wood kind of propped up into the grooves. And when that piece fell through, they sagged in, and there was nothing really holding it up. And this place gets blasted with wind in the winter. So a strong gust comes along and whoop, falls right over.
The mining company fell into debt, but hoped to expand in order to attract more business. They doubled the size of the stamp mill from 10 to 20 stamps, and the Las Vegas Tonopah Railroad built a spur line from their main line to this new mill. It's hard
To think that, give it like another 50 to 100 years, and that thing probably won't even be standing anymore. That thing will probably be all over the ground. Wow. That Christmas moment actually kind of made me happy. Genuinely, I felt good.
hardly
listening to
noticeable
that.
when you're walking on the ground, but if you look closely from the air, the railroad grade to the mill still exists. Around that time, however, their old reliable mines began failing, and they simply didn't have enough ore mined to put all those new stamps to use. By 1910, the population, which had swelled to around 250 in the past, had now fallen down to around 100. Being such an important point along the railroad for maintenance purposes, many of the residents of Bonnie Clare were railroad workers. There was a station agent, who at the time was a man named Frank Patno, and then there were railroad crew and track workers. The foreman of the workers for this section of track maintenance was a Greek named Tom Canalius, who on August 16, 1910, after their shift was over, was accosted by one of his workers who had been drinking. A fight ensued, and the worker, a Mexican man named Delboras Espinana, pulled out a .45 caliber Colt handgun and shot the Greek, hitting him in the leg. Tom was unarmed, and despite the wound, was able to run from the fight back to his own house. Delboras pursued him, trapping him in his house and drunkenly taunting him from the street. Delboras fired several more shots into the house through the wall when Tom suddenly returned fire through the window, hitting Delboras in the chest.
Shit.
Delboras fired 3 more times before he collapsed to the ground and died. Tom was given medical treatment, and his actions against Delboras was deemed self-defense. What happened to the body of the attacker is a
I mean, yeah, that is 100% self-defense. I'm not just going to let some guy just like start blowing holes in my house trying to kill me. Crazy.
mystery, and perhaps was buried in an unmarked grave at the town's small cemetery.
I want to see if we can't find a graveyard. There was a small graveyard near Bonnie Clare.
Aside from the shootout between the Mexican and Greek gentlemen, there are 3 other known deaths at Bonnie Clare. One was a local teamster named Elmer Bodie who was found dead nearby in 1908. Another was a young girl named Dorothy Patno.
Dorothy was the 5-year-old daughter of the local station master for the Las Vegas and Tonopah Railroad. And in April 1911, she died of scarlet fever and was buried here in Bonnie Clare. She was born in Texas and moved to Bonnie Clare with her family so that her father could work for the railroad. There is also a second grave next to Dorothy of a girl named Dora.
With a little bit of digging, I was able to find a partial story of Dora C. Black. She was born in Nevada, and her parents divorced when she was young. She stayed with her mother, who remarried a man named Parley Black, but they divorced in 1913 when Dora was 15 years old. A year later, Dora fell ill, an illness that she simply couldn't shake. However, despite this, she still got married another year after. Her husband was in fact her mother's ex, Parley, her own stepfather. I don't know what the motivations were. It seems that her illness was severe at the time of her marriage, so perhaps this was one of those on-paper marriages that somehow would benefit her situation, but she died in 1916 of this illness. Curiously, immediately after her death was announced in the news...
Thank gosh on that rock in front of the cross, the tombstone, is that it says Black on it, so you could put together that was her name. And she died in 1916. I was kind of curious, because you couldn't see the 1916 on the tombstone, unfortunately. But that's at least good that we kind of have the last name, so now we know who, for a fact, who it was.
Her family issued a statement of gratitude to the railroad that came through Bonnie Clare, thanking them for all of the wonderful support that they gave to the family through her sickness. Dora and Dorothy are the only marked graves in the Bonnie Clare Cemetery, but who knows how many other bodies may have ended up here unmarked.
Oh yeah, especially if there was gunfights and stuff like that. Who knows, right? Who knows who's been shot and killed? But it doesn't sound like a bad community. I mean, it sounds like a very caring community. I mean, seriously. Wow.
By this time, the settlements south of Goldfield had been declining, including Rhyolite, the once booming city of several thousand residents, now well on its way to becoming a ghost town. There was less demand for rail service along the route, and certainly no need for both train companies to be competing against each other. Come 1914, the two of them merged into one and leased out the track rights to the Tonopah and Tidewater Company. On November 22, 1922, a Tonopah and Tidewater train departed Beatty, consisting of a locomotive, a tender, a coal hopper, 3 oil cars, and a day coach for passengers. The train had departed Beatty about an hour prior and was traveling north, nearing Bonnie Clare about 4 miles out. Suddenly, a piece of the brake rigging on the forward truck of the last oil car came loose, fell onto the tracks, and instantly derailed the oil car and the passenger coach behind it. The conductor in the coach called out for the passengers to hang on as the wheels rode over the wooden ties, bouncing the car abruptly, before toppling onto its side and sliding down the embankment alongside the oil car. The train crew halted the locomotive and sprung into action, evacuating the coach car, fearing that the coals from the stoves would start a fire, especially with the oil from the car in front
it's a big explosion.
So badly. Passengers, including ones with broken bones jutting out of their skin, helped the crew evacuate the overturned car.
Oh my god.
Fortunately, the fire never broke out. Nobody was killed, and even the train cars were repairable. Leaving the wrecked train behind, the crew loaded the passengers onto the locomotive and tender and continued on to Goldfield for medical attention. They passed right by Bonnie Clare but didn't bother to stop. Bonnie Clare no longer had a resident doctor and was mostly deserted, despite being the only population between Beatty and Goldfield. Rhyolite, for example, which was once the home of 5,000 people, now had a single man living in it, an older gentleman in his 90s. The railroad spelled the end for Bonnie Clare in 1927, when it announced that it would close the rail line entirely. One last thing happened at this time, though. A man named Albert Johnson, rich from cattle investments, wanted to build a mansion in the hills west of Bonnie Clare, and the railroad would be his only source of construction material. It was now a race against time to ship in all the supplies needed to build his house before the railroad closed up. With a massive stockpile of steel, tiles, plaster, nails, and furniture, Bonnie Clare was suddenly booming with workers and crew coming in and out in late 1927, but this was short-lived.
Work stopped on Johnson's house and is now known as Scotty's Castle.
So that was supposed to be the house?
Currently a museum.
And the last train came through Bonnie Clare in January 1928. The railroad was torn up, and Bonnie Clare quickly faded away after that, closing its post office in 1931. There were a handful of mining ventures over the years that brought temporary workers to the old abandoned site, but nothing long-lasting. In 1939, a new mill was built on the site, and that's the steel mill that we see still standing.
Okay.
It's difficult to say how much of this was new construction in 1939 and how much of this was incorporated from the old mill built on this site earlier. The mill creaks with the wind and is quite literally standing on its last leg.
No shit. Wonder if it's even still standing.
As we saw with the smaller, earlier mill at Thorpe's Well, even at the newest mill from 1939, the process is similar. The ore is brought up to the top of the mill, although by this point, they're using trucks instead of mules. And then the ore is dumped down the chute, and with every level of the mill, the ore is processed further. This hangs precariously overhead, and like the rest of the structure, this won't be standing much longer.
The 1939 mining venture failed, though, within a mere 2 years of being established as a result of America entering World War II, and resources and manpower were diverted elsewhere. These stone buildings, however, date back to the earliest mill on the hillside and have been in use by every subsequent milling operation.
A storage bunker, which likely had a heavy metal door that was removed once abandoned.
All the gear hanging from here on every beam, and everything's sitting here on the shelves. This place must have been so cluttered. Freedom Riders, Hank 75-6.
Scotty's Castle brought one final boost to Bonnie Clare in 1951, a boost that resulted in some of the ruins that we see today. The road up to Scotty's Castle had been washed out and needed to be rebuilt, this time being properly paved. Workers came in to do this, setting up the ghost town of Bonnie Clare as their home base. They set up temporary structures and bought 20 old trailer homes to house the workers. That is where this mysterious old trailer comes from.
Look at that.
It looks like it's the only one to remain on the site, and somebody seems to have either joined it up with a pre-existing building or built this on top of that trailer. Chances are I think they joined it up to a pre-existing building and used the trailer as an extension.
Kind of smart. Yeah, like, nice. It has seen better days, we'll just say that.
Some people paint graffiti, some people pile rocks. Emma, She makes bouquets and leaves them places.
Nice. Nice, classy. That's history right there.
The house here was likely built for the road construction project, or at the very least had been an
Jeez, I thought they caught that on camera, that thing falling apart. No, it's just the wind blowing it back and forth.
existing structure that was commandeered by it. The roadwork was completed, the trailers were packed up, and Bonnie Clare was left behind for good.
Old thing of wood stain. Think it's still good? You are beautiful.
A man named
Jeez,
Victor
man.
Hewson bought the shack and one of the trailers from the construction crew as they packed up, and Victor moved in with his wife, staying there for over a decade and doing his own mining work at the site. The conveniently located A-frame and vertical shaft just a few feet outside of his back door were likely his doing, and certainly were the main occupations of his time.
Yeah, as long as you don't try to climb down in that thing.
It's collapsed in recent years. I've seen a photo of it still standing maybe a decade ago. Pants. Nice pair of pants.
Well, they were.
Victor died in 1961, and his wife promptly left Bonnie Clare behind and moved to Las Vegas. That was it. As far as I'm aware, this place has been mainly home to campers and squatters since then, and nothing else.
There are remains of several collapsed buildings on the site, including many wooden structures, some of them probably related to the railroad, and others probably connected with the Scotty's Castle construction. An outhouse, probably built by Victor Hewson.
So this is just a general junk pile, piled up onto a mound of dirt. This might have been a tailing pile.
A little north of the Hewson cabin, immediately inside the curve of the Bullfrog Goldfield track bed, is this underground chamber.
That's interesting.
The Rattlesnake Mine itself was abandoned, and a shack for the early workers, perhaps dating back all the way to Guy Thorpe himself, still stood up until a few years ago.
You gonna show it?
The second time I came to Bonnie Clare to camp, something bizarre happened. Emma and I got there towards sundown and we set up camp and she started cooking dinner. And I searched all of the buildings to make sure nobody was there. If it wasn't clear enough already, Bonnie Clare is remote. There's no homes nearby, there's no towns. The highway that comes right through there sees maybe 5 cars an hour during the daylight. and the nearest busy highway is almost 10 miles to the north of there. Well, Emma cooked dinner and we ate it, and afterwards I was doing some nighttime photography of the ruins. That's a skill I always wanted to learn, so I was looking forward to practicing. Well, after I took this shot, we heard coming from the flats to the east, a man let out a long, blood-curdling scream. There was no words, he wasn't calling for help or anything like that. It was just a long scream. Well, it sounded like he was about 500 feet away, and it sounded like he was running. I know what the wildlife sounds like out there. I know a bobcat can sound like a person. This was not an animal. Well, I turned to Emma, and I said, "There's a Motel 6 45 minutes from here." I picked up the tent. I didn't break it down. I picked up the tent solid and shoved it in the back of the truck. We kicked the fire out, grabbed everything of value that was ours, and we got out of there within a minute. Now, every time I'm in the desert, I am armed. But who knows what this was? So as soon as we had phone service, I called the police and I said, "Hey, you might want to check this out. Someone might need help." The funny thing is, they didn't know where Bonnie Clare was, and I actually had to describe it to them, and I had to give them directions from the nearest town. Well, that's it. I never heard anything from them. I never got closure. We came back the next morning and filmed, and everything was fine. And ever since then, this ghost town has always come off as a little bit creepy to me.
Every time I've come...
Well, I gotta admit, I was not expecting a ghost story at the end of that, and I don't know if it was a ghost story. I mean, for all we know, there could have been actually somebody out there screaming, right? I mean, for all we know. But then again, or did the police even care enough to go out there and look? You get that sometimes, where they just don't give a shit. Or could it have been just some people out there knowing that they were out there and just scaring them? I don't know. 500 feet, though, you would... I don't know. Maybe they saw their fire and were like, "Hey, I know we can scare these guys." But they were smart to get out of there, regardless. I think you don't want to risk that shit. You don't know what's going on. You don't know if there's actually a murder happening. You don't know if that people are, trying to scare you out of there. It's just better to leave. I mean, the guy is armed, which in case, like, someone tried to show up, I mean, he would probably blow their ass off. But
Hey, Claire, there's always a storm coming. This time, it's a dust storm behind me. That's coming in fast.
The winds began whipping through the ruins. The wooden boards of the old cabin creaked and rattled. The rusty metal siding of the mill squealed.
Look, the whole thing is moving.
look at that one right there in the middle. The one down right here. If you guys can see the mouse, I'm not sure. Yeah, right here. Right here. Look how bent that is. Oh, that is going to come down at any time, if it hasn't already.
The steel beams seemed as if they'd give out at any moment as the dust storm blew around Bonnie Peak and out from the playa to the south. As you can see, the wind was now even too much for my cameras, jittering the picture and blasting the microphone.
And the dust is here. Gotta go.
Our time at Bonnie Clare has come to an end.
Look at
And a
that
good thing,
shit.
because this was a bad windstorm, as you can see by the overturned truck on our way out. The history of Bonnie Clare seemed so muddy because it was a settlement that had trouble defining itself. It's a beautiful ghost town, but it wasn't really a true town. First it was a mill, and then it became an official railroad junction. But it wasn't really a true railroad junction. It had many names and spellings, and while many people lived here, only a handful would have called this place their home. It now stands here, after being settled 140 years ago, backed against the base of the range of Gold Mountain, and facing the winds and sandstorms of the Nevada desert. An excellent source of information for this video, and my go-to for Western ghost town history, is my friend Alan Patera's book series, Western Places. This book here on Gold Mountain, Nevada, contains almost everything there is to know about the town of Bonnie Clare, and can be found at westernplaces.net. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment below. Be sure to subscribe and turn on post notifications. And as always, a special thanks to my supporters on Patreon, especially Marlo Perez,
That was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. I actually really enjoyed that. I don't get too many history lessons. I mean, when I do, it's normally through, you know, paranormal investigations, which is pretty bullet pointy. Like, we just want to get the bullet points out of the way and then go do our investigation, which is fine. But that was a really deep dive history lesson right there on, yeah, the Bonnie Clare ghost town. And that last little bit right there with the scream, I don't know if that was paranormal or not, but it was still quite unsettling to hear, kind of creepy. I don't blame anybody for wanting to, you know, kick the fire out and run away at that point. You just don't know what you're dealing with. Would it surprise me if there was actually ghosts around there? No, not really. Residual energy specifically. I mean, seriously, I mean, yeah, it sounds like there was a lot of history to this place and a lot of probably tragedies. So, yeah, to hear a scream like that might not be too surprising. I mean, for all we know, you know, some pretty dark shit that wasn't even gone over has happened there. I mean, the gunfights, imagine hearing like gunshots out of nowhere from like an old pistol or something. I mean, seriously. Leave your comments down below. Again, guys, go support the original video, get this video up to over 100 likes, and maybe I'll go ahead and react to some more. So if you're into that, then definitely make sure you hit that like button. Guys, I'll see you in the next one. Do take care.
JCARTSARTS is throwing down.